Hi everyone, and welcome to Parallel Magic, the science fiction and fantasy book show. I'm Kate M. Colby, joined as always by Jonas Lee, and today we will be discussing The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. How's it going today, Jonas?
It's going good. It's been a couple of weeks and got another book under my belt. I'm working towards that one of those little Goodreads goals. Like read so many books in a year. I think I was like 12 behind when I first started this book, so I am one step closer to almost being on par.
Nice.
How are you? Yeah.
I'm good. I'm a little stressed out because my work season gets really crazy this time of year, so it just seems like the perfect time to sit back with a drink and talk about something fun for once.
Right.
So I'm all ready for that.
You're in the copywriting field, right?
Yes.
Of some sort?
Yes, I am a copywriter for a wine marketing company. So we're doing our Thanksgiving and Christmas mailings already. And at the time of recording, for you listening in the future, it is July 24th. So by the time the holidays actually roll around, I'm going to be super sick of them. But that's
I bet.
okay.
You basically have 4 whole months of holidays to work with.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much. Well, for me, my season of stress and wonder is over since softball ended the week before. And it's one of those things where it's good and it's bad because I'll miss all the girls and the guys that I'm coaching with. But I also don't have to think about all the things I have to do throughout the entire week. So now I can just read and I can just write and all that kind of good stuff. So we're in good shape now, you and me. We're kind of like a yin-yang type of deal.
Yes, definitely. But the point is we made it here today, and we got a book to talk about, and it sounds like we're actually kind of on the same page this time, so it'll be interesting to discuss it.
It will be. And who knows, we might have differing opinions of what we liked and disliked, but Man in the High Castle is one that I had never actually heard of until that series came out. And I've heard of Philip K. Dick before because of his work with... I always say Blade Runner, but that's not the name of the book. It's like...
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
I always can't... He has such long titles, I think it's just hard for me to spit out. But, yeah. So, I'll tell you what, I'll do my thing where I read a little bit of the blurb, and then we'll just dive right in, because if you have... or listened to our podcast before and not now, we're kind of skipping the whole spoiler part, because if you wanted to know more about this, then you're going to know about it. If you already read it, then, well, now you're going to learn your 2 cents in. So we're just going to jump right into things right after this. So without further ado, Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. It's America in 1962. Slavery is legal once again. The few Jews who still survive hide under assumed names. In San Francisco, the I Ching is as common as the Yellow Pages. All because some 20 years earlier, the United States lost a war and is now occupied jointly by Nazi Germany and Japan. This harrowing Hugo Award-winning novel is the work that established Philip K. Dick as an innovator in science fiction while breaking the barrier between science fiction and the serious novel of ideas. In it, Dick offers a haunting vision of history as a nightmare from which it may just be possible to awake. Ta-da! Short and sweet, I love it.
Beautiful.
I try. I really try. So, well, actually, first off, we forgot to say what we're drinking today. What are you drinking?
Well, today I am having a screwdriver, which, if you don't know, is vodka and orange juice. And my reasons for this are kind of threefold. So the first is my cover of Man in the High Castle is this like really beautiful orange and yellow cover. So it made me think of orange juice, and also I thought it would be a nice refreshing drink for summertime. I don't want to get political, but with this novel being about but with this novel being about Germany and Japan taking the US over and all the drama happening with Russia right now, I thought a little vodka might be appropriate.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Well, for me, I kind of went half that route. I had half of a screwdriver, so I had a shot of vodka, essentially. And I am just chasing that down lightly with some Michelob Ultra because it's refreshing and low calorie, as summer should be.
Beautiful.
I
You're
know,
just
I
like a
try.
beer commercial.
Just like a beer commercial. I always wondered why hard liquor and beer commercials just didn't get together every now and then.
Yeah, they should team up. I'm sure they're owned
Really?
by a lot of the same companies.
They gotta be. They gotta be close. But I digress. Off of well, this will be a. I mean, they'll have political commentary, I think, in this just because of what it involves. But let's get into the initial structure of it. Writing style. How was the writing for you? Because
Well,
I guess I should say personally, prefacing this, that I did my normal, which was the audiobook, so I didn't read it. I kind of did the, I guess, lazy man's way of getting through a book quickly. But yeah, tell me what you thought about the writing.
okay. So I will start with the disclaimer that this is one of those episodes where it's been about a year since I read this book. And I feel like I have a pretty decent grasp on it and my impressions of it. But if I fudge up some details, I apologize. So, what I remember about the writing, which the Goodreads description kind of hinted at, is that it was very literary for a science fiction book. Normally with sci fi and fantasy, you get a little more fast paced, and as we've commented before, the language is more a vehicle for the plot as opposed to actually being, poetic or, fanciful for its own sake. But I felt like when I read The Man in the High Castle, it read more like a literary novel. And I thought Dick's use of description and the way he kind of constructed the world was very well done, very masterful. I mean, you can absolutely tell reading this why it's a classic in that conventional sense and why it stands up to literary fiction of its time.
Yeah. I would definitely say that, and I think most popular novels are novels that get mass produced at that stage, because this was back in 1962, and if you made it to a publisher at that point, you basically had some chops as far as writing, and I think it was pretty evident that he was a good writer. Literary sense, of course, it's all in there. There was parts where I think it was I couldn't tell if it was it was how it was written in the actual novel or just how the narrator was speaking it. But there are parts in there, and maybe you can clarify that whenever they went to the West Coast, they kind of did a little bit of broken English where they would drop a lot of prepositions.
Oh,
Did
yeah,
you
that
notice that?
was. Yes, and I think that's because the West Coast was controlled by Japan. So
Yeah.
there were a lot of Asian people who didn't speak, perfectly correct English. And there was definitely more of a Japanese influence in the way the language was being portrayed.
And that actually carried over to the I guess American occupied citizens then at that time too, because it was with the shop owner that did it. That I noticed mostly. Like I kind of expected it when he was going to that Japanese couple's house while they were there, but then it would be under his. Even when he was just imagining it, he was imagining, or not imagining, I should say, when the narrative was in his head, and he was talking about things through his own mind. I noticed he was dropping all of his prepositions too, so you kind of get that sense of he was actually cultured into that lack of needing prepositions and things like that already. So I thought that little tiny bit was actually very genius in the sense that I wouldn't have thought to gone through that level of, I'm going to drop the ofs out and the is out and this out, just because he's already cultured to it and I don't have to explain it and you'll have to figure that out. So I thought that part was kind of actually, I tip my hat to Philip K. Dick for that.
Yeah, there were a lot of really good details like that. Because, I mean, he did some very big, obvious world building in the politics and, the economic structure. But yeah, the little details like the language and, having the characters do the I Ching to foresee their futures and make decisions and just like the way they dressed, a lot of the details really showed that cultural melding and the idea that, enough time had passed since World War II that our cultures really were intertwined and had kind of become their own hybrid, like, that lived unto itself in a way. I think that was like the worst way I possibly could have articulated that. But you get what I mean. Like, he'd melded the culture so well that they became their own thing, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very good overlay because this actually took place, I think, what was it, 20 years after the war was actually done?
Yeah, it said 62,
I mean, it's 20 years.
So.
Yeah, so, I just meant in the story itself. Was it 62 in the story as well?
Yes.
Oh, never mind then. But, I mean, that part of it with, I guess, assimilating into the culture of the people that are conquering you type of mentality is where I was at. And, the whole East Coast is basically Germany, and the whole West Coast is all Japan. There's still some of those, I don't know what they call them in the middle America, I guess, neutral zone type areas that haven't been quite occupied.
Yeah, we Midwesterners, we have the freedom.
We withstand. Yeah. But I think throughout all the good things as far as the writing goes and the structure of it goes and just the idea of it, I think the idea of it is what is alluring to most people. And when I first saw it on, I think it was Amazon Prime, I'm like, oh, that sounds like a very interesting story. And, watching it first and then going into the book may have done me a disservice. Because, I mean, as far as the book goes, I don't want to say that it's bad writing at all. It was just, there's a lot of dry parts to it. I think when they're going into the I Ching part of it, I'm kind of like, feels like 4 pages of them talking about their hexagrams and line stanzas and, things that I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I don't quite care enough to look it up. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the Amazon show. I watched like the first 2 episodes and it just didn't really grab me. And the book, the concept of it absolutely grabbed me. Because, it's this great alternate history. We lost the war. That's such a defining moment in modern history. To see it flipped is a really cool concept. And I think a lot of the world building and the political and economic aspects really played that out. Mm-hmm. But I think the plot itself was definitely more character-driven than action-driven. And that's not necessarily what I expect from a sci-fi. It's not a bad thing, but I think that, by the time they reach the end of the book and they're at the author's fortress, the author of the book within the book, mm-hmm. I just kind of put it down and was like, okay, so what even happened? Like they go on a journey, but it just doesn't feel like that much happens, and you're not really left with a super concrete resolution.
No, it really just kind of peters out at the end and makes you go, oh, okay, sure. And you haven't seen the actual show within itself, other than a couple episodes.
No.
So as it goes on in the show, there's actually a lot more action-based in building, and the dynamics between Frank and Juliana are very, when I was reading the book, because I've seen the whole first season, I haven't really seen much of the second season, you get to this point where you're like, God, she's really portrayed in the series as more of this, feminine hero trying to do what's right, and she's going off on her own to do the good things. And in the book, it seems like more she was just kind of like, I don't want to be with this guy because he's a weakling, and then moves on to another guy, and then gets to this point where she's infatuated with the book, and then all that kind of unfolds. So, the character structure in the book versus the series, that's where I'm saying it did me a disservice, because the series was actually very well reconstructed. It has a lot of the same elements, a lot of the same characters, but there's a lot of new characters that bring a lot of depth and contrast to the story of what it could be. And I think going from that series then to that book, I just kind of went, wow, this is just like slowing down and leaving lots of gaps and not really keeping my mind engaged enough to really want to continue that book. So that's where I was with it as far as characters go.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those books that took me longer to read than it should have because it's not a necessarily long book, but like I'd get to the end of the chapter and it would feel kind of slow and I wouldn't necessarily feel compelled to read on to the next one. Like I wasn't hooked, so I was like, okay, well I can stop now and go on and do something else with my life and I'll pick it back up, tomorrow or on the weekend whenever I have time and yeah, I mean, it's a very well-written book, but I just wasn't that enthusiastic about it, I think. I think the concept sounded really awesome and I mean, I hate to be one of those people who's like all about action and suspense and intrigue, but I just felt like there was kind of a missed opportunity and it just went a little too literary for me.
Yeah, I think, well, especially with science fiction. Science fiction is one of those genres where you have to kind of commit to that structure of keeping your reader engaged mentally as well as emotionally. And because, I mean, it is blending science with, the imaginary realities that might be out there. So, I mean, it's got some basis in truth, but also giving that backdoor of, like, this doesn't have to be true. So,
Right.
you should always be moving along. And I think, I mean, I will give Philip K. Dick this. He has written a lot of stories that really brought forth a lot of interesting thoughts for his time period. I mean, back in the 60s, if you were to come up with some of the stuff that he has, I mean, for this book, for Blade Runner, he has a slew of them. If you just look at just the synopses for his books, they're really engaging. But likewise, I think that we have perfected that system since then. So we've gotten into this way of making a structure where you can actually put a hook in every chapter and make them short chapters so that people are not wanting to stop and put it down and realize that they can come back in a month and nothing's going to be different. They actually make you keep engaging and engaging and engaging until basically you're done. And then you want to get another book under your belt. So I think it's the marketing capitalistic aspect of the way that book publishing is nowadays doesn't really feed well into the market of the books that were I guess the building pillars of science fiction back then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, and I think too, our attention spans nowadays are shorter. Like, I like to think that I'm an intellectual and I'm above that, but I'm obviously not. When I try to read literary fiction nowadays, I just don't find it all that compelling. And we've definitely changed our style, and I think that's a reflection as much of our culture as it is, anything else.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, we've gotten used to being quickly satisfied with anything and being able to quickly drop something just as fast because there are so many different options. I mean, just go on to Netflix, go on to Hulu, go on to Amazon, and you will see that there's like 8 series out there that you probably never heard of that are all pretty much in that same realm of like, that would be interesting, I should look into that. And then all of a sudden, every minute of your day could probably be filled with entertainment just because there's so much out there. But finding that new content, that new what's best thing, and I think when this story came out on Amazon Prime, at that moment, there wasn't a whole lot on Amazon Prime as far as new content, and this one actually gave them a foothold because it's taking a classic sci-fi novel and then splitting it up, making it actually, giving it a better base, I should say. And like the first couple episodes are kind of dry, but then it starts getting into the action part of it and starts getting into the intrigue part of it, and then it gets into the real science fiction part of it. And then all of a sudden the series is like, they give you that moment where that series is done at a climactic moment and you go, well, crap, now what? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, there's going to be season 2. And you're like, shit, now I got to wait. And I think that's their ploy. But I think that in this book, though, there were definitely historical aspects that, for me, as a a former history student, thought was just really entertaining, just because they drained the Mediterranean Sea to make it all farmland. And part of me is going, how the hell could you have done that? Like, where that water has to go somewhere. Where did it go? And I think there was like, I forgot what they called it in Africa. Like, they basically just had like a mass Holocaust in Africa as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it was really interesting too how since Hitler was getting old and feeble, how his lieutenants and his core group were kind of jockeying for power and who would take over, and because that was all really interesting to think about, because we kind of saw that play out in Russia with Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking about that, thinking about this podcast and preparing for it kind of reminded me of the death of Stalin and that movie. But I think my favorite concept of the world building was probably the book within the book. I believe the title was The Grasshopper Lies Heavy.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was kind of surreal, because we are living that book. Like, we are what happens when the Allies win World War II, and it's one of those trippy moments. You know how someone will say, like, oh, what if your whole life that you're living right now is a dream, and or there's aliens observing us in a glass bubble and we don't mean anything. It kind of gave me one of those moments. It was like, oh, yeah, like our future very well could have been different, and I could be speaking Japanese or working on a farm in Kansas and fearing every day that the Nazis were going to come in and take what limited freedom I have left. And so it's just really, I think it was really cool when it was finally revealed what was in the book. It was one of those, like, oh, we're in the book moments.
That's us. Yeah, and I mean, that's another part to his writing that I thought was really great, just because it did incorporate that plot twist that if you were reading this back in the mid 60s, you would have gone, oh my god, I've never heard of anything quite like that, because nothing like that is really, that I can think of, as had surfaced at that point, where it's like, yep, this is an alternate reality, but they're reading a book about our reality. You go, no. And the series touches on that in a different aspect, because theirs has like film reels that show different realities that take place. So there's a lot of really great things that happen, and I think it's just the pacing and the way that it was structured for the time frame that it came out just made it hard for me to get through. But like all the concepts in there, you could probably pick apart and talk about for, if nothing else, just the what if we lost the war? Like, what would we be occupied? Would all these things have happened? Because I think in the book, Pearl Harbor didn't actually happen for them. Like they pulled out of the harbor, so all they did was sink a few different, fishing boats or some shit, and all these little tiny things that probably would have happened or wouldn't have happened. You can never really be sure, but there's so many different things with history, and I guess as a history guy, that's why books like these are entertaining, just because I always do the what ifs. Like, what if the North lost the Civil War? What if we lost World War II? What if World War I never happened? That kind of thing. So I commend him. I think it was a pretty good book. It just was so, it's like meatloaf. If you get it just right, it's good, but if it's too dry, it's like, wasting your time for an hour. So
That's an apt comparison, I think.
I tried.
Yeah, he definitely was ambitious, I think, in all of his books, and this one especially. It's a concept that I believe at the time was relatively unexplored. I'm sure people had asked themselves the questions over drinks, like, man, what if we would have lost? But, and since then there have been books written, and I've been told that, I haven't read any others, but I've been told that some of them follow the more traditional action, fast-paced plot that modern audiences are more used to. But yeah, I think just to have the gumption to take on this idea and think it through down to the way each character speaks, like you mentioned before. It's really impressive and really admirable, and as an author, I don't envy him that task and the amount of research and, planning it would have required. But I think he does pull it off. He doesn't necessarily pull it off to my personal taste, but I absolutely, believe the book is a beautifully written book, very important for its time, and it poses a lot of really, what do I want to say here? Really relevant social questions that I think are relevant now because of the situation with Russia, and will remain relevant because we're never going to get along. Like
We're
maybe
just never going to.
maybe that's my
We'd like
pessimistic
to.
view of it. I hope the world proves me wrong, but I feel like there's always going to be nations battling for control and ideologies conflicting, and so because of that, this book will stay relevant for as long as I can imagine.
And I think that's a good testament for him, is that the fact that this book can withstand time, because it's already withstood 46-ish years, 56 years. So if we're still talking about today, I don't know if when he was writing it, that he thought it would actually last this long, but clearly it's going to last this long and then some, because one, it's tackling a major focal point in history, which was World War II, and then it's also playing to the what do you consider, I don't know, I guess humane treatment after occupation. That's about the best way I can try and strategize it, because the Germans don't really look at the Japanese going that we're still allies. They more like want to have their land if they could. I think the Germans just want to occupy the entire world, and then they're already talking about interplanetary travel, where they're trying to colonize the moon and Mars and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it really. And then I think when, I can't remember the name of the leader on the German side, but when he passes, and then there's that power vacuum where they're just struggling to try and one up each other to get into power, and that in that kind of society it would just be detrimental, because you have, whether there was like 6 or 7 different people that they're saying could become that high supreme leader type of role. So I don't know, so many things to think about.
Yes, definitely. It's not a book that you can read lightly. Whether you want to or not, it definitely makes you think and ponder deeper questions, which is a satisfying read in its own right.
Yeah, while you're drinking with friends, it's definitely a good topic. It beats politics in general, and that way you can kind of always fall back on, well, this isn't real.
Yes, I love that about fiction. You can explore topics that are very pertinent today, but with the safety of keeping it all centered around a fictional world.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. It's what we do. So, with that being in mind, now it's time for shot ratings. You're going to go first because I brought it up.
Okay. Well, I had a different number in my head when I was preparing myself for this podcast today. But then I went back and read my Goodreads review and saw my original rating and figured she probably had a better idea than me. Because,
Your previous you?
She just, former Kate, past Kate. So,
Kate of old.
Yes. Kate of 2017
Kate of 2016
or whatever it
17,
was.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm going to go with 7.
7?
Yes.
That's a fairly mid-road thing, I would think.
It is. Well, and that's how I felt about it, because I love the concept and I loved some of the elements of the book, but it didn't really hold my attention. It didn't really excite me once I got in the thick of it. And but I still recognize that it's a brilliant book for its time and even for our times. So I wanted to give it its due, even though it didn't necessarily fit with my personal reading preferences.
Gotcha. Well, I thought about it probably the same way that you did. I tried to think of it, literally or literarily. I don't know how to say that. As a literature book. And I realized that even though it has great writing and it has great concept and it has, great this and great that, ultimately I have to come down to it at the end of the day going, but would I read it again? Would I suggest it to people as a fun thing to read? I would suggest it to people as an interesting thing to read because it engages a lot of different what ifs in your mind, and especially for people of history. But, if I'm recommending this to my daughter, per se, that's one I'm going to be hard pressed to suggest, because there is so much. You have to really love history to really love this book, I think, in that context. So I gave it a 6 out of 10, just because it was so it didn't make me go, I can't wait to get back to this book feeling. And I really like that with books, where it's like, I love this world, but I also love the way that you've developed this world and the characters in it. And for me, the characters in this world weren't anything too gripping, honestly. I mean, you had different aspects of life, but beyond that, I didn't have a real emotional tie to anybody where I'm like, I want to know what Juliana's doing. I want to know what Frank's doing, and, that kind of thing. So, yeah. As far as everything goes, if I was just going off of story, it would have been higher, but off of everything in total, 6, which I think is my lowest rating yet, so I'm very sorry to anybody who really loved this book.
Well, and that's the great thing about fiction, is if it doesn't find an audience somewhere, it finds an audience elsewhere, and there's something out there for everybody to love. So if you do love this book, please go in the comments, tell us, why it held you, why you couldn't wait to flip the page and find out what happens, because I always love to hear from people who disagree with me, because it gives me a different way of looking at books and appreciating aspects of them that I might not have considered.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I love people who disagree adequately. I mean, I don't need people yelling at me of how stupid I am because I don't like a book. I mean, give me a reason as to why, and maybe I'll see it a little bit differently, because I think when we don't agree on books, like Harry Potter's book, for the last one, for example, I think I saw a lot of your points, and I hope that I put at least a couple of thoughts in your head about my points, but then we can kind of find that common ground of what we do like, and I think that's what book discussions and reviews should all be about, just finding different aspects that we can do. So I'd love to hear from anybody. I don't think we've had many people comment on our book reviews so far, so either they're all agreeing with us or they all don't care. So I'm going with the first. So,
well, either that or they have so many drinks with us that they just can't trust themselves to type.
That's true. In that case, I forgive everybody. But still, go out there, give the podcast a like, give us a review, let us know how we're doing, let us know what we can do different, let us know what you'd like to see in the future. I think the last poll that we had us like dead even with 4 different books, and we had to whittle that down to 2 books, and I think that was only beat out by 1 vote. So we're always up for what you want to hear, because we'll try anything out, not guaranteeing that we're going to like it, but we'll try it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we've done a good job so far of presenting a wide variety. I mean, you can't get much different than Cinder last episode and Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, that's a pretty polar opposite, especially just in time frames alone. So yeah. Well, I had fun. Next time I think we're doing Annihilation. That's the one that's on the docket, at least. And I think it's a series, actually. I think it's a trilogy. The Southern Reach trilogy, number 1. But there's a movie for it out there, so I mean that should engage somebody to at least watch the movie or or read the book and tell us what's what. So I guess other than that, did you have any other closing thoughts that you can think of?
Nope. I just want to say thanks to everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. And I'll raise what's left of my beer bottle and say cheers to you, lady.
Cheers.